I'm Jake Lund, a senior UX designer, and this is UX Pursuit.
Welcome to UX Pursuit, a podcast dedicated to the unique stories and journeys of UX practitioners, how they got where they are today, what hurdles they overcame, and what advice they have for those currently pursuing UX. I'm Tim Bridgham, your host, and my hope is that these conversations might help and inspire those who are currently in their own pursuit of a UX career. Joining me today is Jake Lund, a smart, talented, thoughtful, and hilarious UX designer. We had a ton of fun talking about his career, the core of UX, and his 3 C's for being a good UX designer. We even discussed some great ways he's been coping with this prolonged work-from-home life we all find ourselves in.
Well, Jake, thanks for taking some time today to chat and share your story.
Yeah, of course.
I guess let's start where all good stories start, at the beginning.
Great. So, in the beginning, my mother and my father met in Houston, Texas in 1981. I guess we don't have to go that far back.
No, not that far back.
Okay, great. So, I guess just starting at the beginning of my education and career, I went to Central Washington University and got my bachelor's degree in graphic design. And so no real specialization in UX, just really getting foundations in graphic design. And this is back, I graduated in 2010. Oh, nope, I graduated in 2014. Wow. At any rate, there over east of the mountains wasn't a real fleshed out user experience program going on, and actually not a whole lot of digital design. So while we're going through the program, I'm doing this with a couple of my buddies that I live with actually, which is really great. Just the 3 of us in this program. We each just individually pushed each other through school to not just produce the bare minimum for our projects, to kind of go above and beyond. Not in a formal way, but just kind of inspiring one another to do more with our projects. Mm-hmm. For example, we had one where we were tasked with creating a typeface, but the whole project really was just to create the letter forms. And I ended up taking mine and pirating some font creation software and creating my own font. And actually, that's my number one claim to fame. That's my biggest draw on Behance. Has some tens of thousands of views on it now.
What's the name of this font?
It's called Metria Free Display Font. And so just really pushing to do more with our work and to do more in the digital sphere with our work. And fast forward to graduation, we all get out and kind of go our separate ways. And I jump right into the career field. I'm getting married like a week after graduation. So really hitting all the major milestones one after another. And so I need a job. And I get out of school, I kind of jump into the recruiting pool. It's not necessarily as easy right out of school to get whatever job. I'm sure that's a pretty common occurrence, but
let me ask, what kind of jobs or job descriptions are you kind of targeting or going after?
That's the thing. I'm not really even sure. I've kind of gotten out of school with this skill set of graphic design, which is, it's almost like communications at this point. Like you can do all sorts of stuff with it, but I'm not really sure. And so I'm applying for more like print design jobs, and that just doesn't really feel like it's going anywhere, especially with I have at this time like a big interest in digital design, UI design, trying to go more that direction.
Were you doing any of that in college?
Yeah. So some of our, again, our projects that we're tasked with doing, we're creating like a splash screen for an app. And I went through and did more than that, more than was required, and kind of fleshed out kind of what the whole mission of the app was. This one, I think there's actually an app out there that does this now that was for traveling, like an RV, was specifically targeted at RVers. and setting your start point and your end point and saying, I want to hit the best fried chicken between these 2 points. And it would say, okay, well, that's here in, wherever in the middle of nowhere in Texas. And so that was the general idea. And I think it exists out there somewhere today. If not, patent pending, that's my idea. You can't take that.
So you have two claim to fame then.
I mean, yeah, I guess I'm just famous now if I start rattling them off.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm out of school. I'm looking for a job. I've got just this portfolio, kind of a mixed bag of things. I can do kind of all sorts of stuff. So I get into the recruiting pool, actually, which was a godsend for me, honestly. Just getting to interview, going in and interviewing with a recruiter, having them kind of look for those jobs for you. And because they know your skill set, I was getting all sorts of different jobs coming through. But the one, I needed to get one pretty quickly after graduation. So I jumped into presentation design for Microsoft, like a little offshoot. A manager that used to work at Microsoft started their own organization, and just like a 5-person little startup doing presentation design for Microsoft. And did that for a while, and it was kind of a work from home situation, and that wasn't necessarily for me. And I did it for a year, and here we are again.
Yeah.
Somehow I ended up back here in the same room.
So you did that for about a year where you're doing presentation design for the small kind of 5-person team.
Yes. And then I just sort of rode the recruiting pool. Like I hopped back out every time. I believe I changed jobs maybe like once a year before I got to Blink. And just using the recruiters to help me to say, I had someone on the inside. I had, my recruiter that I could email personally and say, hey, I think I'm ready for something new. So check me into something else. And so I got, all the while I'm sort of building up my personal portfolio, trying to figure out what I really want to do. And all through school, I was overshadowed by my 2 buddies that I was there with because they were more talented traditional artists. They're like whipping out these really awesome illustrations and this like just awesome paintings, different kinds of artwork. And that never was really my bag. I was always more like good with the tools, like give me a creative suite and I could figure out how to do kind of whatever you need to do in there. And sort of solving problems more like that. But I didn't know that was necessarily a career path. That is solving problems. And at that time, I feel like it wasn't super clearly defined either. UX is still really budding at that point, as in like an external agency of user experience designers that can come in and take a look at your problems. That really wasn't a specific job title at that point, to my knowledge. And so my recruiter ends up pointing me toward a little agency called Fresh Consulting that's on the east side. And I interviewed with them, had a few personal projects of little apps and websites that now, of course, looking back on, I'm like, oh my gosh, they hired me with this stuff. And they were, took me on, agreed to kind of show me the ropes of UX. I remember my first day having a PM hand me this thing that says, like, you need to make a carousel for this website. I'm like, okay, what's a carousel? And really starting at the bottom and having to pull some engineers aside on my first day and be like, oh, what do you need for this? He just told me to make a carousel. And so that was a stressful day. Spent like a year there really getting to know how it was mostly UI design, honestly, in retrospect. Sorry to anyone at Fresh, but it, especially now working at Blink for a number of years, didn't have the same rigor, and maybe they do now at this point, I'm not sure, but it was more UI design and getting to know how things are done and implemented in code, and how to work with other designers and other engineers to kind of get things built. So that was really super helpful, really critical for me to I don't know, learn all those things. And then jumping into, again, sort of was like, this isn't for me. I feel like I've tapped out in terms of like what I want to do here. And I've called my recruiter up and she's like, okay, well, I got this other thing that's coming down that I think you'll be good for. And it was a contract position to work on the new Skype. And at this point, and now it's been released and it just bombed horribly. They were trying to work some social media aspects into this version of Skype. Like my grandma doesn't want stories, Microsoft. She really doesn't. And she doesn't even know what stories are. But it was a really great foot in the door with some people that would end up becoming my mentors, and who I actually still work with, Ron and Laura. Ron Morris and Laura Blanchard. Laura's still my manager, my direct report on this project, which is really cool. Sure. And have not necessarily ridden their coattails, but really have expanded my sphere of people that I know, and just kind of followed that. Worked at their individual agency after that called Blammo. And it was a small UX shop, probably, we had 3 designers and then Ron and Laura, the principals. And so it was a really, really small shop. We're working with a lot of startups at this point. I've kind of gotten more skills in terms of I know how the process works. I know kind of what you need. And I'm getting a lot of cool opportunities to work with nonprofits because Ron and Laura are really passionate about that. And so I got to do a bunch of cool work with KEXP and some other smaller startups that have now gone on to become much bigger projects.
Are you, at this point, are you kind of considering yourself doing UX design, or is it still UI design, or some combination of the both?
Yeah, I think after moving on from that Skype contract position to working full-time at Blammo, it was really that jump into UX. Ron, my mentor, is just like a really brilliant guy, and he showed me a lot of the processes that I still use today, a lot of ways of documenting your thinking as you go through the process. Like my first look at journey mapping, it's kind of incredible to me that I hadn't been diagramming my thoughts to be able to explain things better to that point. Like I'm just kind of fumbling my way through making carousels, which now I know what they are, and just sort of producing the UI. But now that I'm at Blammo, I'm actually getting a look at like, oh, this is the process. Like this is how it works. This is how you understand the problems that you're working with, how to ask the right questions to figure out, that we're solving for the right problems. And Blammo was definitely where it kind of got busted wide open for me. I think my time there was really good, but it was still missing something. I feel like I was learning all of these sort of like mixed bag of skills that I could kind of pull out whenever I needed to for like a given problem or thing like that. But didn't really have any real grounding in like, am I solving the real problems here?
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so still having a lot of fun and like making a lot of good work for a bunch of different clients. But it wasn't until Blammo kind of came to a close. The company essentially dissolved and we all kind of went our separate ways, but in groups. So I actually followed Laura back to Blink UX, or Blink, where we work currently and where she had worked prior to starting her own agency. Mm-hmm. So we end up, me, Laura, and Megan, our other coworker from Blammo, end up at Blink, and I get introduced to user research. Wow. And I actually believe we had one project with user research. The reason that it wasn't really a big a big selling point at Blamo and our smaller little startup is because we're working with these smaller companies that just don't have a budget for it.
Mm-hmm.
They really do just need UI design. They typically have engineers. They can get stuff built. They think they know what they need. So just whip up some designs for us and we can go from there.
So let me interject with like a project like KXP. Is that up to you, or is that Ron or Laura who's sort of leading the understanding of what they want? Because you're not just like making design decisions on your own, right? You're kind of getting some direction from them.
Yes. Earlier on, they're much more involved in the process, but toward the end, we're definitely working directly with KEXP with just the requirements that they have, and making our designs based on that. So, I think the last thing we built for KEXP was their donation flow. So, like and you should play around with it sometime. It's actually kind of interesting, because of all the rules for it's like tax deductible because they're a nonprofit, and if you're donating, what gifts you can receive in return for those donations has to be really specific. So the logic behind I'm donating $25 recurring, I can get this gift, or if I do $80, I can get 2 gifts. Anyway, a bunch of like really kind of wacky logic, and they sort of Ron and Laura sent us out on our own to sort it out. So put your feet to the fire, but I think it was a good proving ground.
So it sounds like you're doing. Are you calling that kind of research, or are you not really showing this to participants or users or participants yet?
We're still validating it secondhand. So like we'll create the designs. I'm at this point making prototypes and things like that that they can click through and sending those over to KEXP, and then they're testing them internally. But still not really acquainted with the term research yet, even though it in some capacity was. So kind of interesting that I knew that was the most important thing. Like, if they say that it works, if we understand that users know how this works, then that's how you solved it correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, kind of a what's the word? Just a more peripheral type thing for me at that point.
Okay.
And so as Blamo resolves, we end up at Blink. And as I said, we get introduced to user research. And actually, my initial point was that I had met you as a result of that while I was still at Blamo. And I don't even know if you remember that.
Yeah, I think I probably would have been like the IT person setting you up with accounts and things like that. Or maybe if you use the labs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you were getting us into a lab like after hours. And yeah, I was like, oh, this fancy place down on the waterfront. And we all met down there, and you were setting up the room and everything. And I was like, oh, whoa. We had the document camera pointing down at the phone and had some users come in, and we got to watch. And I was like, wow, this is some fancy stuff.
Nice. Who led the sessions?
I think Laura did, honestly. Yeah. I don't think that there was like a screener or, a session guide drafted up necessarily, but we were pretty scrappy back then.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. And so we end up at Blink, and I get introduced to user research, and really have spent a lot of my time since then learning as much as I can about that process, because I get to work with so many awesome researchers and learn about that process. That just inevitably bleeds into my thinking and the questions that I ask to figure out what the actual problems are. So it's really been a game changer. And I mean, now I can't go back. The curtain has been lifted, and I understand, this is the true path for UX.
Research.
Yes.
Self-plug.
Yes.
Cool. Well, I didn't realize you were so integrated into sort of this recruiting pool and using like companies like Vitamin T. I'm guessing it's something similar to that.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's lots of other companies around that do similarly. What was that like a daunting experience to be in this sort of contractor role, things are not so permanent and
Yeah, I think it was less daunting because it was less daunting than just like looking on my own because like I said, I didn't really know what I was looking for. And to have someone else look for me, like, sure, sign me up. I needed, and like I said, that my priority was to get something stat. Like I needed it. I needed a job. I have a family now to support. My wife's a nurse. She already had her job. So it's like, okay, let's we need that dual income to pay for our Capitol Hill apartment. So got to bring something in. But no, it was really, I like swear by it. I introduced a ton of friends to my recruiter specifically, and I typically, save for the Skype gig, did full time. I was like, I want to be salaried. I do need something stable. And there were a lot of salaried positions that just use the recruiter as like a finder to get the talent.
Oh, okay. So not necessarily going in and doing sort of 6-month contracts with the chance of going full time. You were kind of eyeing full time positions.
Yeah, exactly.
What if that's a kind of a model or a process that people want to go through? Do you have recommendations for kind of setting that up or going through that?
I would just say you either do it kind of being open to whatever comes at you. I know it can be a mixed bag, especially depending on your skills. Either that or have your work on your portfolio and tune it in a specific way to appeal to a certain job type. Because I know it's pretty vague out there now. There's a lot of positions doing a lot of things that are very similar and very different. The terms are still getting figured out, especially in UX and just digital design. So just, I'd say spend some time on those personal projects that you're passionate about. You say you love designing apps for this reason. You love designing like microsites or whatever it is. Do more of those, fill your portfolio with those, and have that lead the way for your recruiters to find those jobs that you're looking for. I don't know if those are good examples. I don't know who wants to design microsites, but somebody out there does.
Sure. There's, just for those really small needs.
Really, really tiny. Yeah, my phone's very small. I can't, and it's right here. So
it's like the opposite of where we're going.
Yeah, exactly.
So after college, you've got more of this graphic design portfolio. Were you then sort of starting to do personal projects to sort of hone in on skills around like UI or the beginnings of UX, even though it may have been a fuzzy term out there?
Exactly. Yeah, I did. I kind of used my work from school as a springboard for that and did, like I said, I turned my font into a real font that's usable now that you can download. I took my, that it was actually a brand redesign that I did for Winnebago that ended up turning into that app that I described earlier. I ended up creating some animations using some illustrations that I had to make for school, just like taking those things, learning some After Effects to push some layers around. And I applied to, and kind of tailoring them to who I was applying to. I applied to Blind Tiger, which I don't know if they're still around. They were down on the waterfront, and they do specifically beer labels. And I was like, oh shoot, that sounds super cool. And so these, they do beer branding specifically. So they do labels, they do like tap handles, all the kind of cool stuff that surrounds a lot of different beer brands, especially here in the Northwest. And I made a little animation of myself pouring a beer, like my head is on the tap handle and it pours a beer and then it slides and then it kind of loops and it pours another beer. And so things like that just kind of push your skills a little bit and are have like a little personal touch go a long way.
Yeah, that's awesome. You had mentioned sort of earlier about having these bag of tricks or like side things you could sort of do. And I guess the question comes from this thing that I've seen where I see lots of early UX people putting UX designer, researcher, UI design like in their title, and And just curious, like, what are your thoughts on that, or how do you sort of perceive that, and um, does that kind of relate to this bag of tricks? I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get what you're saying there. I think it's just kind of fuzzy. I know you and I both have come into UX from different backgrounds with different skill sets, and but still kind of pointing towards the same goal of solving problems by talking to people.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that you're like relegated to using one skill or another, or being confined to one skill or another. That's one of the things I love about working at Blink, is that I get to do all sorts of things. I get to do some of the research. I get to do, based on the project, I get to do some animation work. I get to do information architecture. I get to do wireframing, prototyping. It's like I have these things that I know how to do in varying capacities, and based on what's needed, you can kind of pull those out.
Well, I guess I'm curious, like, do you have like a title that you think is like, this describes my like focus, or like maybe my number one skill, and then knowing that you can do animation, but it's not like your primary.
Yeah. I guess I say all that to the point that the title is kind of amorphous just based on the field. Like, you're a researcher, but you know how to do so much more than that, and you've been exposed to so much more than that. So I don't know that it needs to be in your title, but maybe in your skills section, just because people participate in all different parts of the UX process, not just whatever they slap in their title.
I'm curious, how has your UX career been different than you thought it would be?
So I didn't really expect it. I think just what I mentioned earlier, like my path to it hasn't been direct. I know there are a lot more direct paths to it now through, boot camps and, like the HCDE program at UW. I think that there are some more direct routes, but I found my way into it with my background in technology, just being good with, how to I don't know, how to use different tools on my computer. Like, I just took a liking to that, and that coupled with my graphic design, as well as just loving talking to people, I think has sort of led me organically to a job that I think really uses all the different parts of me, which I love. But I wouldn't have wrote it down maybe as I graduated from high school or even college as like the thing that I'm going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I concur. To sort of, one day it was this moment that I was like, oh, dang, like this is the culmination of all of my interests and passions.
Yeah, right. Because I've been meaning to ask you about that, because I know that you started at Blink as an IT person and transitioning into a researcher role. I think that's so cool. What are the odds that you get to be like? Did you pick Blink as an IT to be IT for Blink on purpose, or?
No, and that's the funny thing, I guess, or the fortuitous, whatever you want to say, stroke of good luck, godsend moment, whatever, that I just was, my wife and I were looking to move to Seattle area, and I had a friend.
Oh my gosh, your friend.
A friend who was a friend of Karen, the co-founder of Blink, and he told me what they did, and I had sort of at the time heard a little bit about like UI design, and was sort of looking at that because I have a very minimal design background in architecture where I studied for a few years.
Okay.
Something that was interesting to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, then I just sort of lucked out, and I was doing IT at the time, and they needed someone, and I interviewed well, I guess, and they were willing to move me out from Kansas. And then it was, just in that moment of seeing what Blink did, and interacting with researchers and interacting with designers, and really getting a chance to look under the hood and understand what UX was beyond just like what you would read on a website or in a classroom. And it was like I said, an aha moment that I was like, holy cow, this is it's like design, it's like talking to people, it's interesting, it's technology, and the more I've sort of dug into it, the more layers of UX that, I didn't even really realize and still uncovering. And that's why I think it's so interesting. And why I like want to talk to other people and hear their stories and hear what they think UX is and where they want to go next and things like that. So
yeah, I mean, I think we have such a huge variety of people from so many different areas, industrial design, psychology, like wherever you're coming from, you can end up here and you can be a part of the process. And it's just, I love seeing like even our hosts at the front desk coming up and like being a part of the projects, becoming project managers, like becoming researchers. It's so cool to see everyone acknowledge how cool this field is to work in and to get to be a part of it. So
well, I feel lucky that I ended up at Blink, and fortunate that I was there and that they were a place that was open to helping me grow in the company and even shifting roles. But I always feel a little bit like, well, what do I tell people who are like, hey, how do you get a job in UX? Because I can't just be like, become an IT person at a UX firm. It's that's probably not a very
it's not a super helpful answer. No.
Yeah. So, but it sounds like you have, you didn't like me, you didn't luck into some like company that does, beer branding as like their, front desk host. And then you realized that you wanted to do branding. And so then you shifted into that role. You had this path of honing these skills, I think, over lots of jobs. So I don't know if there's a question there, just more of an observation, I guess.
No, I mean, I think, I guess to elaborate on that from my point of view, there were a few times in my career where I kind of had to make that decision, or I had a few different options as to where I could continue to pursue my career and my skills. And as the Skype project ended, I had an opportunity to work in-house for 2 different agencies, one of which is a real, it's full of super talented visual designers that work on a lot of brand work, that work on a lot of like more experiential work. And oh my God, these people are so talented. Pilot Lab. And then I also had the option to go with Blammo. That's the more sort of thoughtful, the more like technical side. Let's figure out how it works. And I was always more drawn to that, solving problems. And I still do use my visual design skills on a daily basis, but it's far and above about solving those problems first. And so that has really just sort of, each fork in my path has just continued to lead me toward that.
Got it. So it sounds like problem solving is a skill or a passion that you would say is valuable to your work.
Definitely. Yeah.
What are other skills or traits that you think, UX designers should be cultivating in themselves to help advance them in their career?
Yeah, I think just being curious is a big one. I've worked on some enterprise products that are boring as hell, that like 4 people use somewhere in some like high finance back room, and I still found it interesting. Like just being curious about, oh my gosh, someone does that for their job, and I'm going to help make a tool. I'm going to go work and understand kind of what they're trying to do and why it's not working super well right now, and then work to help solve that problem for that specific person. And just being curious about those different fields, that's part of why I love working at an agency. I've only worked at an agency. That's been the life for me, because I just love learning about new domains. I love getting into like in the past year, I've worked for like online retailers. I've worked for policy, like public policy, lobbying groups. I worked for some industrial design companies, for some like physical products. So it's like just being able to jump into all these different fields is so cool to me, and I don't think I'd give it up for anything.
Nice. Any other skills or traits that come to mind?
The other two I have, the 3 C's TM are
Cut,
curious,
clarity, and color.
That's it. That's the 3. Oh my gosh. Well, this was a great session. Thanks, Tim. Oh man.
Anyway, sorry I interrupted.
No, you're good. You're good. Now I'm just thinking about diamonds. My 3 C's are curious, conversational, and critical thinking. Because of the research that we're doing, I mean, I remember coming from Blammo, having no experience in research, and on my first project with this Fortune 50 law firm, doing a stakeholder interview with some senior partner there, and I'm getting ready for this interview, and I'm under the impression that another designer is doing it. I'm sort of shadowing as an interaction designer on this first project, and I think, oh, Jordan's going to lead that. And about 5 minutes before the session, she's like, so you're good to lead this, right? And I was like, ha ha ha, just sort of chuckled and assumed that she was joking. But sure enough, I get in there and they're all staring at me. And so I go through and lead this stakeholder interview. And I mean, thank God I am more of an extrovert and just love talking to people. So it was easier than I expected it to be. So those skills are something that take work, I think, to build up and maintain, especially now, like in quarantine, it's so much harder. Like I'm talking to you and it's like a whole new world again. So I think just like keeping up those conversational skills, and then critical thinking, I mean, it's hard to pin down as a specific thing, but just knowing what matters and what doesn't, figuring out what to pay attention to and what not is super important, since we're just a barrage with all this information. I learned so much in a given project, and I need to know what actually matters to helping solve these problems and what doesn't.
Right. Yeah. Great points. So you mentioned these 3 C's as sort of qualities for those up and coming. What about qualities or skills that you're sort of working on now? Or
yeah, I think I don't have some quippy set of words to use, but the few things that I am working on right now are learning from researchers on how to ask better questions, just through observation and through talking to them specifically. They have these more formal backgrounds or more formal education in conducting research from start to finish. And so even just by watching them, understanding, oh, okay, that's why they're asking this, that's why they're following up with this question, and learning how to kind of follow those leads, the important ones as you go through a session, are super important. I even just in a meeting that I have with a client, walking through a specific flow that a user is going through, I need to be sure that I'm asking the right questions and I am actually asking them, and not just sort of going through the motions and creating some UI that doesn't really matter. You end up doing so much more work if you're not asking the right questions. Mm-hmm. Another one is working through conflict. This was on my year in review, actually, that I should be doing better at working through conflict, because even though it may be easier to avoid, you end up with better outcomes. And through that conversation, you can kind of root out what the meaningful thing is, to put it abstractly. But I'm pretty conflict averse, which my wife will attest to. I've gotten better at it as our relationship has gone on and as my career has progressed, but still sort of pushing on those things, not being afraid to voice my opinion because I know more than I think I do. Still have a bit of imposter syndrome there, and feeling more confidence to kind of push on people a little bit more, to work through the maybe a potential argument with someone who might have a hill to die on for this specific instance, we'll end up with a better outcome. So, and then my last one is learning to take a walk around the block, especially now. Like, I've been cooped up in here trying to solve a lot of problems in my own head, and it's not necessarily the way to go about it. You only know so much. And if you're not talking to those other people, if you're not talking to the people that you work with, if you're not talking to people you don't work with, you're going to have a much harder time kind of solving those problems, and you're going to kind of solve them in the same way that you have, even though it might not be the best solution. I wrote here, you're not going to learn everything or solve every problem in front of a screen. You take so much, at least I personally take a lot from my experiences out in the world, whether I'm like riding my bike, playing a video game, going to like a park, join to some sort of event, like whatever we can do now, I think still kind of frees up mental space for me and sort of inspires me in more intangible ways and energizes me to do those things. So taking a walk around the block is a must.
Nice. Yeah, that actually was a great segue into another question that I had. I was curious, do you have any hobbies or passions that I'm guessing you probably do, but what are your passions or hobbies outside of work? And they, like you just said, they could even help contribute to your work, but they may just be things you're interested in doing for being a well-rounded human being.
Totally. And honestly, a few of them just to distract from quarantine. I think like I can't even keep my phone, like my wallpaper on my phone, the same for more than a week. And so I need things to like be moving. Let's change it up. Let's do something different. And this has been a pretty intense period of not that. Mm-hmm. So both my wife and I have been doing a lot to kind of keep busy and also just like stimulated in the right way. So I've been skating and biking, especially with skateboarding, which I've ridden a longboard for a long time, but I've recently just started getting into skateboarding, which is a totally different skill set. And it's almost like juggling, which I also don't know how to do. But from what I understand, there's sort of a shift in your brain that has to happen to understand, like, I'm going to flick this board at the ground and jump, and I'm going to be able to like hold onto it with my feet. So it's like it's a pretty active, it's mentally engaging, and it's just like a new thing. And so it's pretty good for my brain in that way. Beyond that, I'm playing video games with my friends, which is really good for my buddies that I have out of town, just to stay connected with them. So I don't care, like there's not a lot of guilt around spending too much time playing video games, because it really is a time to catch up with my friends who are, around the country. And then the other thing is home improvement, which has been a big one for us. I built a deck in my backyard. You did too? Oh my gosh. Well, way to go.
Yeah.
I want to hear about your experience, but that was my first woodworking project.
Yeah.
And I walked into Dunn Lumber with my eyes the size of dinner plates, just like, what do I need? My wife's like, it's fine. Just get some wood and some nails and just bring it home. And so I bring all this stuff home, and I order it, and they have to deliver it in like a week. And I've drawn up some plans for this inside of Figma. I've got like everything laid out. I know exactly the dimensions of everything. I've like really done my prep work, because I'm terrified of it being like off a little bit, even though the world and like every wall is not square. So why the hell are you trying to do that?
It's exactly how I feel.
Yes. My biggest revelation, which I hope all the listeners take home and just at least write this down, is that 2x4s are not 2 inches by 4 inches. They are 1.5 inches thick. 1.5 inches. Why is it called a 2x4?
Isn't it not even 4 inches the other way? It's like 3 3/4 or something.
Oh
Or
God.
is it really 4? I don't know.
I don't know. I need to go check on my deck now, though.
Oh gosh, that's hilarious.
But it came out all right, and I adjusted my plans. I learned some things, and as long as you're learning something from it, then it's not a failure. And I could say more inspirational things, but I won't.
Nice. That's great. Any other gold nuggets of truth or of inspiration or of anything that you'd want people kind of pursuing UX to know or to think about?
I spent a large part of my early career thinking that my coworkers and clients wanted me to have the answers, when really what I needed were the right questions and to ask them. Which honestly is still like something that I have to remind myself, where you can get caught in a way of thinking that you have all the information you need to make a design decision, when sometimes you don't. And if you know that, you need to ask those questions, because you'll end up doing more work because of it. And your coworkers and your clients don't expect you to know everything. And a lot of times the questions that you end up asking, they haven't even really asked themselves. And so it can be, I mean, I've had projects change course based on a few questions that are asked. Yeah. So don't be afraid to ask them. The other one is people think differently than you. I was just talking with Megan about this. She was remarking on some research sessions that were going on with some designs that they're drafting up for a client. And there's a photograph in here that has 4 people in it. And the researcher's asking about this specific section of the page and not specifically about the photograph. And these people just keep getting drawn to this photograph. It's really all they can comment on in the comp. And the researcher's like, okay, well, just imagine that this photograph isn't there. Can you comment on the rest of this area of the content? And they just can't do it. And I've come to learn that there are people who just don't use their imaginations. There are people who can't really understand what you're trying to explain, especially as a designer. If I have some kind of complex interaction that I want to propose, I need to be armed with ways to explain it to people, sometimes in more than one way, because people don't think in the same ways. And that's honestly half the battle, is making sure that as a designer, you're presenting it in the right way so people understand it. And the other half is making sure you understand what the actual problems are. So
awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, thanks so much. That was really enjoyable to learn more about your story and just to chat and hear your thoughts. And I think you'll find it super valuable and interesting.
I hope so. I hope I wasn't too rambly.
No, I think it was great.
Yeah, thanks for having me. If you want to get in touch with me, feel free to check out my website. It's lunde.co, lunde.co, or you can shoot me an email at jake@lunde.co.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake.
Thanks, Tim.
Again, a big thanks to Jake for being a guest on the podcast. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and found some good inspiration around UX or even home improvement projects. For me, I love the way that Jake approaches UX, that it really boils down to just solving problems by talking to people. I've had the opportunity to work with Jake on some unique projects, and I can vouch for his authentic pursuit of solving problems. I can't wait for the next opportunity to work with him. Thank you again for checking out today's episode. If you're thinking about or pursuing a career in UX, I hope you find these discussions informative and helpful. You can find UX Pursuit wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe now, and if you know others who are pursuing a career in UX, please tell them about the show. And be sure to check out episode 1 with UX researcher Laurel Zanobi and episode 2 with visual designer Megan Greco. To learn more about me or the show, please go to uxpursuit.com. Also, at the end of the first season, I'm planning a panel discussion to answer your UX career questions. So, if you have questions, please email me at hello@uxpursuit.com, and we'll do our best to cover them in the final episode of the season. Lastly, a big thanks to Irene Barber, a fellow UXer, for creating all the music you hear on the podcast. Be sure to check out her music under the artist named Nearby on Spotify or at nearbymusic.bandcamp.com. Again, thanks so much for listening. I'm Tim Bridgham, a senior UX researcher, and this is UX Pursuit.
Wait, one more. I'm Jake Lund, a UX designer, and this is UX Pursuit. How about, hi, I'm Jake Lund, and this is User Experience Pursuit. I'm user experience designer Jake Lund.
You're off script.
Aw, geez. I could do like a more of a newscastery. I'm Jake Lund, a UX designer at Blink, and this is UX Pursuit.